Hi, Medical Wildcats. I'm Joseph Guggenheim. I'm a 1972 alum of the medical school. And this month, my presentation is on Navy Pier, that gargantuan structure that extends over half a mile into Lake Michigan from the end of Grand Avenue, visible from our campus. The story of Navy Pier begins in about 1909 with Daniel Burnham, the architect for the city of Chicago. Burnham proposed 5 piers to combine commercial and recreational use. He said, "The lakefront by right belongs to the people. It should be made so alluring that it will become the fixed habit of the people to seek its restful presence at every opportunity." He wanted to put a chain of parks along the lake shore, unlike some other cities along the Great Lakes, where the shoreline was covered with warehouses and factories. Municipal Pier number 2, one of the 5 piers, was designed to relieve river congestion and bridge usage. You can see in the picture on the right how congested the Chicago River was, and the bridges would go up and down to allow boats to pass. One of the favorite excuses for being late to work was, "I was bridged," meaning I couldn't get my car across the river because the bridge was up. Only one of the 5 proposed piers, and that is Municipal Pier number 2, was the only one that was ever built. Burnham proposed lagoons for recreational use, and you can see in this overhead picture of Chicago looking east toward the lake, at the purple arrow you see Municipal Pier number 2, which was supposed to be an extension of Chicago Avenue, the street on the north side of the Ward Building. And at the blue arrow on the right, you can see the other pier, which formed the lagoon. This was an extension of 22nd Street, which is now known as Cermak Avenue. And between them, there was a lagoon for recreational use. Burnham died in 1912, and after that, the Chicago Harbor and Subway Commission engaged Charles Sumner Frost as the architect to build the 5 piers, but only one was ever built, as I said. The shore of the lake was known for shifting very frequently. So in order to prevent shifting of the pier, the engineer designed a structure starting at the bottom of the lake, 20,000 Oregon timbers, which were driven 20 to 27 feet below the lake bottom. And you can see them sticking up on the other side of the water in the picture on the right. And then just above that, he had steel tie rods. And then above that, concrete foundation, steel columns, a triple row of piles, concrete walls, clay, rock, and sand, and loose rock. And in over 100 years, the pier has not shifted. The pier was going to combine shipping business with the public entertainment. And when it was completed, it was almost as wide as a football field, 292 feet, and over 5/8 of a mile long, 3,040 feet. It cost $5 million, which currently would be about $152 million. It continues to be the longest pier in the world, public pier in the world. At the east end, the end in the lake, there was a terminal building, and this contained a restaurant, rooftop garden, concert hall, auditorium, and 2 observation towers. The Grand Ballroom underneath the dome is now the Aon Grand Ballroom, and it has survived. The Tribune said, "No other city in the world has any structure on a waterfront that compares with Municipal Pier." On the west end, the design incorporated classic Beaux-Arts styles. There are terracotta figures of turtles, lizards, sheaths of wheat, and Native Americans in the terracotta ornamentation. There is a pair of towers, which each hold 60,000-gallon water tanks. Chicago was still nervous about fires following the 1871 fire, so they made sure there was enough water in case of fire. 50,000 visitors showed up when the pier was completed on July 4th, 1916, but the official opening was not until 9 days later, when 25,000 more visitors appeared. The visitors were attracted to this pier by concerts, picnics, and promenades. During World War I, the pier continued its recreational use, but it also became a military recruiting and training center, barracks for the military, a carrier pigeon station, Red Cross station, detention center for draft dodgers, which were rounded up at the Cubs games, and also Barnum and Bailey Circus. It was estimated that as many as 200,000 young men were rounded up as draft dodgers during this period. After the war, the name was changed to Navy Pier from Municipal Pier Number 2 in 1927 in honor of those who served in World War I. The pier became a major entertainment center for Chicago. It was a docking site for cruise ships and ferries, which went to Michigan and also to Lincoln and Jackson parks. In 1921, Chicago held a mini World's Fair called Pageant of Progress, which attracted 1 to 2 million visitors in a 2-week period. The pier featured airplane and motorboat races, a 146-foot high Ferris wheel, fireworks, live band concerts, children's activities, and a carousel, as you can see in the picture on the right. During the Depression in the 1930s, Navy Pier hosted trade shows, and Chicago hosted the Century of Progress World's Fair during the Depression in 1933 and 34. The fair was not actually held at Navy Pier. It was held at a site beginning at the museum campus now, where the Adler Planetarium and the Field Museum are going south, but it served as a site for ferrying visitors to the fair. But with the growing popularity of the automobile, people were turning their attention from the lake to the open road. The plans for the other 4 municipal piers was abandoned due to the financial conditions of the city and nation. During World War II, the Navy took occupancy of Navy Pier, and it became a naval training station. Lake Michigan was deemed safe from enemy bombers and submarines. Over 15,000 fighter pilots and 60,000 sailors were trained at Navy Pier, and perhaps the most famous was President George H.W. Bush. During the war, 2 freshwater steamers, the Wolverine and the Sable, were converted to makeshift aircraft carriers, and you can see them docked just south of Navy Pier in this picture. They were shorter than ocean-going counterparts, and pilots could practice landing and taking off. No pilots lost their lives doing this, but more than 100 planes ended up in the lake, and some of these planes are still being recovered. In this picture, in the far upper right corner, you can see what became the Furniture Mart, now known as Lakeshore Place. After the war, the GI Bill allowed many veterans to obtain a college education. The University of Illinois opened a branch at the pier in 1946, which was operated until 1965. It was nicknamed Harvard on the Rocks and offered a 2-year program for commuting students. It quickly outgrew the facility's capacity of 5,500 almost immediately, and it was later replaced by the Circle campus in 1965. The city opened a garage, police department, traffic division offices, and a traffic court at the pier. The branch of the University of Illinois had no fraternities, sororities, or dormitories. There were no athletic teams. Students were described as a monotonous sea. Some of the students included future Governor Jim Thompson, author Shel Silverstein, news correspondent John Chancellor, and actor Jerry Orbach. 75% of these students were veterans. The city opened a gymnasium at the pier, and this is a picture of it. It was still in existence in the late 60s when I was in med school, and I'd sometimes go over there for recreation after class. And in the winter, it was cold and dark, and if you showered, you had to do it fast because it was cold. It was a depressing place. During the 50s, Mayor Richard J. Daley wanted to turn Navy Pier into a major inland port, and it was thought that the St. Lawrence Seaway would make this possible. It would connect the Atlantic Ocean with the Great Lakes and hopefully revolutionize the city's economy. In 1958, the pier underwent one of many renovations, this one costing $4 million. England's Queen Elizabeth was present for the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway in 1959. And commercial usage of the pier rose and then declined precipitously over the next 2 decades. Chicago underwent a great resurgence of Great Lakes shipping with its peak volume in 1964. But the St. Lawrence Seaway was not what it was hoped to be, and ultimately failed to generate enough international trade to keep the pier competitive with other ports. In the 1960s, brought an abrupt decline to its use as a commercial site. And during the 60s, the McCormick Center opened in 1961 for conventions, and it took away much of the trade show business. But fire destroyed the McCormick Center in 1967, so conventioners returned to the poorly maintained pier. Once again, the city underwent a massive restoration project and landscaping. Chicago's first holiday folk festival was held at the pier during the 60s. And with the return of conventions to the rebuilt McCormick Place and the University of Illinois moving out, once again the pier fell into disrepair. There were several opinions of what to do with it. Mayor Jane Byrne wanted to make the pier a festival marketplace like Boston's Faneuil Hall. Mayor Harold Washington wanted to make it into an urban park for all Chicagoans. The first Chicago Fest, known as Rock Around the Dock, was held in 1978, and it was continued annually for 5 years. The sixth Chicago Fest was held at Soldier Field. This eventually became the Taste of Chicago. But it was mired in controversy. Mayor Jane Byrne nominated 3 white board members to the Chicago Housing Authority in 1982. So the Chicago Fest became a target for civil rights activists. Reverend Jesse Jackson urged people to boycott the Chicago Fest. And Stevie Wonder canceled an appearance. Performers include multiple music genres. Aretha Franklin, the Beach Boys, Cheap Trick, Willie Nelson, the Commodores, Chuck Berry, Frank Sinatra, Muddy Waters, and the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. In 1989, the Metropolitan Pier and Exposition Authority took over the improvement process for the pier, and they oversaw the management of both the pier and the McCormick Place, nicknamed McPier. New plans included public promenades, museums and exhibit spaces, retail and food offerings, an indoor garden, and a new Ferris wheel. In 1994, the city opened the outdoor Skyline stage, which featured acts by Alice Cooper, Cheap Trick, and Cirque Shanghai. In 1995, once again, the pier was renovated, and it opened in the first complete year, 1996. There were 9.3 million visitors. The new design was criticized as cluttered and a tacky tourist trap. Several movies were filmed at the pier. Raw Deal in 1986 with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And you can see in the background, you can see the Aon Tower and the Sears Tower, which later became the Willis Tower. The Color of Money was also filmed partially at Navy Pier. The Dark Knight Batman movie was filmed at Navy Pier, where the citizens of Gotham were trying to escape the Joker and were getting on boats to escape from the pier. The Transformer, Dark of the Moon, and Divergent were also filmed there. In the 21st century, an international competition was held for a 30-year plan, once again to renovate the pier, and it was awarded to James Corner Field Operation, the designer of the Manhattan High Line. In 2016, the Navy Pier announced that over the next 30 years, it would adopt environmental practices and become a model of sustainable urban landscaping by using native plantings, benches constructed from recycled steel and wood, efficient energy use, greener water reclamation, and water permeable sidewalks to collect, filter, and absorb reused stormwater. In 2016, America's Cup race was held at Navy Pier. This was the first time a freshwater race had been held in the America's Cup series. Now there's a 17-acre Polk Brothers fountain and plaza, which is constructed at the front of the pier. And this water fountain at the plaza has programmable water, and it can mimic waves, schools of fish, and flocks of birds. The pier now features Children's Museum, the Chicago Shakespeare Theater, WBEZ, the National Public Radio Station broadcast studio, Crystal Gardens with palm trees, and a new Ferris wheel, 196 feet high, and the gondolas in the Ferris wheel are now climate controlled. Our medical school holds its graduation ceremonies for the MD and PT programs in the Aon Ballroom, the domed structure at the end of the pier. And you can see this elaborate dome from the inside in this picture. This was formerly the Grand Ballroom at the far east end of the pier. Well, let's get together again next month virtually in observance of Black History Month. My subject will be Bronzeville. In over a century, the neighborhood of Bronzeville on the south side of Chicago has been the center for African-American business and cultural life. It has been the home of many artists, writers, musicians, and athletes. So let's get together again virtually next month. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay connected with each other. And I look forward to our meeting again next month.